Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Julie Rose with CPS HR Consulting. On behalf of Leslie Scott, Executive Director of the National Association of State Personnel Executives, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Building a Culture of Employee Engagement in State Government. Unfortunately, Leslie is unable to join us today due to the loss of a family member. Our warmest thoughts go out to Leslie and her family during this difficult time. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few pieces of information about the webinar. To avoid interruptions to the presentation, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You can still ask questions using the Q&A box located in the panels section of the webinar dashboard. We'll make every effort to address your questions at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is available on the CPS HR Consulting website and will also be available on the NASB site. We'll also forward a link to all of today's attendees once the recording is available for viewing. Our presenters today are Bob Lavinia, who is the Director of the Institute of Public Sector Employee Engagement with CPS HR Consulting, and Rebecca Hunter, the Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Human Resources. As I mentioned, Bob is the Director of the Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement. The Institute is dedicated to helping public sector organizations measure and improve employee engagement. Bob has held positions as Assistant Vice Chancellor and Director of HR for the University of Wisconsin, Vice President of Research for the Partnership for Public Service, and Administrator of the Wisconsin Civil Service System. Bob is a former Governing Magazine Public Official of the Year, and the organizations he has led have received innovation awards from NASB, the Ford Foundation, Council of State Government, Urban League, Society for Human Resource Management, and others. Rebecca Hunter serves on Governor Bill Haslam's cabinet as Commissioner of the Department of Human Resources. Prior to this appointment, she spent 6 years as the Director of Human Resources for Hamilton County Government in Chattanooga and held management positions in governmental finance for over 25 years. She is a certified public accountant and is certified as a senior professional in human resources. During her tenure with state government, Rebecca has established the Department of Human Resources as a leader in innovative human resources practices while shaping the best workforce for state government. She has successfully led efforts that have resulted in improvements in employee performance and aligning their work with agency goals and the governor's priorities. Welcome, Bob and Rebecca. We'll now begin our presentation. Bob?
Thanks very much, Julie. Also want to welcome everyone. We have a great turnout, and we appreciate your participation. Of course, we're excited to speak about today's topic, building a culture of employee engagement. And I'm excited about the topic because I believe the biggest challenge that public sector organizations face today, and by that I mean at all levels, federal, state, and local, is attracting, developing, engaging, and retaining talent. Because in government, our ability to succeed depends almost entirely on our level of talent, having the right people with the right skills in the right places at the right times. One of my previous bosses, the CEO of the Partnership for Public Service, likes to say that in government, we spend about 80% of our time developing policies and 20% of our time executing or implementing those policies. And he believes in the private sector, it's the reverse. 20% of the time developing policies and about 80% of the time implementing those policies. And I don't know if the numbers are right, but I think the sentiment is because in government, we can have the best policies, the best ideas, the best technology, but if we don't have the talent, the people to execute or implement on those policies or technology or ideas, we can't succeed. And employee engagement can be a powerful tool to help improve individual and organizational performance. And of course, that's what we'll talk about today. And this is a conversation that isn't going on just today in this webinar or even in this country. It's really going on around the world. The Deloitte Consulting Organization's 2016 Global Human Capital Trends Survey, 7,000 respondents from over 100 different organizations from around the world. 85% of the respondents reported that they believe the issue of employee engagement is either important or very important. A little closer to home, the Boston Consulting Group issued a report on public sector human resources a couple of months ago in which it identified employee engagement as an urgent priority for government. And here you see the picture of Rebecca and me and Leslie. So what we're going to talk about today, at least in my part of the presentation, are four things, and you see them here. And what I'm going to try to do is provide some background and context about employee engagement. What is it? What does it matter? What have public sector organizations done to improve it? What does it mean to create an engagement culture? And discuss the role of HR in improving employee engagement. And one of the points that I like to make is, even though HR has a critically important role in improving employee engagement, successful engagement initiatives can't just be an HR initiative or a project. It really requires leadership, strategy, and creating engagement culture. So I'm going to provide some background and context and then turn it over to Rebecca, who will do kind of a deeper dive and talk to you a little bit about what the state of Tennessee, which is a leader in state government in employee engagement, has done not only to measure it, but also to improve it. Here is a picture of a book that I wrote, and I'm doing this not only as a commercial, but I really want to explain why I wrote the book. Two reasons. First of all, I believe in the power of employee engagement, and that's what we'll talk about today. But secondly, although a lot has been said and written about employee engagement, I hadn't come across anything that I thought really focused on the unique challenges of improving employee engagement in government, in the public sector. And I believe that managing in the public sector is different than managing in the private sector. And in many cases, it's more difficult because some of the unique aspects of managing in government. So that's why I wrote the book, and that's what I tried to cover in the book. Provide you, as I said, with a little bit of context. So this is a chart that shows, as you see, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data on the age distribution, federal, state, local government, and the private sector. And I think you can immediately see in the public sector, we have a larger percentage of employees over the age of 50 than the private sector. On the other side of the chart, a much lower percentage of employees who are under the age of 30. And this chart really has lots of implications, particularly for those of us who work in human resources, not just in state government, but also in local government. I know we have some local government folks who are participating today. Has implications for things like succession planning, knowledge transfer, recruiting and hiring, but also has implications for employee engagement, because if we want to put ourselves in the position of replacing the baby boomers who are now beginning to move into retirement, we have to create the kinds of workplaces that will not only attract talented young people, including talented young people, but will create the conditions for these folks to make that personal commitment to the organization, feel that they're making a difference, and have satisfying careers. So let's talk about what employee engagement is. As you see here, it's really about the employee making a personal connection between the work that he or she does and the mission of the organization. Engaged employees are proud of where they work, they're proud of the work that they do, they feel the organization values them, and in return they're willing to deliver what's known as discretionary effort. In other words, they're willing to do whatever it takes to improve the organization and help it achieve its mission. And it goes beyond job satisfaction. We want our employees to be satisfied because we pay them well, they have pretty good benefits, and they have a reasonable workload. But we want them to go beyond that and really be engaged with the organization, with their colleagues, with the mission of the organization. I like to think of engagement as having a kind of an intellectual component. That is, I feel that this is the place where I can make the most important contribution, and also an emotional component. This is where I really feel that I can make a difference because I believe in the organization's mission. So it's about the head, and it's also about the heart. And these are some of the things that engaged employees do. They'll stay even for less money. Research shows that even if employees who are engaged have an opportunity to work elsewhere, they will stay with the organization. They'll also recommend the organization as a good place to work. And there are a couple of reasons why this is important. First of all, we want our folks to be saying good things about where they work, about the public sector. to kind of go against this constant drumbeat of criticism of government. So that's what we want people to feel like and to be able to say that they're working in a good place to work. We also want them to be out there as sort of unofficial recruiters. If we're going to replace the large cadre of baby boomers who are walking out the door, we want our folks to be encouraging and recommending people they meet, their friends, their neighbors, to consider the public sector as a place to work. So these are some of the characteristics of engaged employees. I'm going to show you some data now about the business case for engagement, why it matters for our organization in terms of performance, and why we should pay attention to it. But first of all, before I show you the data, I want to show you a picture. And usually when I do this in person, I get some chuckles. And this is an actual photo of work that was done by someone who we might refer to as actively disengaged. These are the folks who are working very hard every day to undo all of the good work that you're trying to do. But let's actually take a look at some data. This is from the Gallup organization. Gallup has done a lot of work on employee engagement, has an employee engagement survey that it has administered to literally millions of employees. And what you see here are the results, the summary of the responses from about 1.4 million employees who have completed the Gallup Q12. And Gallup took a look at those responses and also the key performance indicators for the organizations those folks worked in, compared the performance of the top quartile, the top 25% in terms of employee engagement, with the bottom 25%. And what you see here are the results. So high engagement organizations, more profitable, more productive, better customer satisfaction, fewer safety incidents, less lost or stolen inventory, and less turnover and absenteeism. And keep in mind that this chart shows the difference between the top 25% and the bottom 25%. If we were looking at the top 10%, the top 5%, the top 1%, the differences would be even more dramatic. How about in government, though? This is a chart that shows the results of an analysis of around 38,000 federal employees based on employee engagement scores, showing that the high engagement federal agencies almost twice as successful in achieving their strategic goals. That's what this average PART score means. You don't need to know what PART means. But it's their success in achieving strategic goals, fewer sick leave used, fewer EEO complaints, and less lost time due to on-the-job injuries. Some more data from International Public Management Association for HR. Engaged public sector employees 4 times more likely to stay in the organization and 5 times more likely to recommend their workplaces. This is something we mentioned earlier about how we want our people to be saying good things about where they work. Another survey from Deloitte, also public sector, showing that engagement is linked to performance that supports the mission. It's linked to creating more collaborative and innovative work environments, and also lower costs of disengagement. Gallup estimates that in the American economy alone, disengaged employees cost from $350 to $450 billion a year. Also from another organization, survey of public sector employees asked a sample of employees to respond to a series of questions or statements, including I can impact quality, cost, and customer service. You see that highly engaged employees almost 3 times more likely to say that they agree with these statements. And of course, we want our employees to feel like they can individually affect things like quality, cost, and customer service. Here is an interesting piece of data. Percentage of employees who said they would like to fire their current boss. 51% of the actively disengaged think it's all about their boss. If they could just get rid of their boss, their lives would be a lot better, whereas only 6% of those who are engaged feel the same way. Another survey, more than 1/3 of U.S. workers said willingly forego a substantial pay raise in exchange for seeing their direct supervisor fired. Think about that for a moment. Now, we're not sure if it's the fact that the supervisor gets fired or the fact that the employee gets to see their supervisor get fired. In either case, though, kind of an alarming data point. This is something that has actually been proven again, to get to the business case for why it's important to focus on, measure, and improve engagement. It's been shown, particularly in the public sector, that improved engagement leads to better organizational performance. And really, it's about performance. Improving engagement isn't just the right thing to do, even though it is, but it's because improved engagement drives performance. And I showed you some data from the public sector. There's also a lot of private sector data showing that improved engagement drives financial performance. So improved engagement drives better performance, results in higher citizen satisfaction, generates more trust in government, and it's a virtuous cycle. When I was at the Partnership for Public Service, we did a piece of research with the Gallup organization. Gallup did a telephone survey, random sample of folks across the U.S., and asked the folks who answered the phone to think about, within the past 6 months, their most recent interaction with someone in government. And what Gallup found, that when the person who responded said that they had a positive interaction, they were also 3 times more likely to have positive opinions about government in general. That is a powerful finding. And what it means is that individual public servants can move the needle of public opinion in a positive way, one interaction at a time. So I'm going to turn it back to Julie, and we're going to do a poll now to get a sense of, in the audience today, the extent to which all of you have some initiatives going on around employee engagement. So Julie, if you would show the poll. Okay, I think we're waiting for that. Yeah, are we showing the poll, Julie? Okay, good.
Yes, the poll is active. We are getting a
great.
really good response rate.
Good.
So let's just give that maybe about another 10 seconds. We've got a great response rate going on, but they're starting to slow down a little bit.
Okay.
And it looks like we go ahead and close the poll and share results. And then,
okay. I
I
can't see them.
Yeah, I can see. So what we have are, let's see, we have 42% voted no.
Great. So almost 2/3 have initiatives going in that category. You are hearing and will hear today that will help you move down the road to engagement. For who have not yet started, will help you go back to your organizations and really begin that conversation about why we need to focus on engagement, why we need to measure, and why we need to improve employee engagement, because it will help us deliver better performance and better service to the citizens that we serve. So let's talk a little bit about the level of engagement. This is from the Gallup organization, again, based on the Q12, which is the Gallup of the Gallup database responses. 32% engaged, this is in the U.S. economy, and 18% actively. So that's in general. This is state and local government from IPMA HR, 47% engaged and 50% not engaged. So a higher percentage, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, to a larger extent than in the private sector, people come to work in government because they are already where they work. But still, even if we say, okay, it's better in local government. Still, according to this data set, fewer than 1 out of 2 employees in the public sector are engaged. So it's kind of a good news, bad news story. The bad news, of course, engagement means there is tremendous potential after measuring engagement to improve it and therefore improve performance. So how do we take a look at retention? If we believe that high engagement results in retention, might be able to look at attendance, look at our employees. And there's a lot of research showing that the best way to is to conduct an engagement survey. And there are a lot. My organization, CPS Institute, we have our own surveys for public sector surveys out there. The key is to make a commitment by the organization to ask these to tell us how they feel about their work, the mission of the organization, their colleagues, their supervisors, leaders, then with the results. Organizations that serve employees and then don't act on the results. So I'm going to talk about what government agencies have done, as you see, to achieve high levels of engagement. But I want to qualify that by saying I don't believe there is a one-size-fits-all engagement. Certainly not in the United States, in the public sector, where we have 50 states and 90,000 missions, different political situations, different budget situations, at organization to assess its own level of engagement through surveys, figure out what its employees believe it's doing well, to do better, and then results. But it's also useful and instructive to understand what public. It's really about examples of that in a moment. It's not about a short-term project. It's about making it part of our strategic. It's also about leadership and senior leaders making the commitment to improve engagement. I'll give you one good example, even though it's from the federal government, Patent and Trademark Office. Several years ago, 100 best places to work in the federal government, near the bottom. 5 had risen to #1 in best. Is the leader, the commissioner of the PTO, she made a personal commitment to creating the kinds of workplace Patent and Trademark Office up in the rankings, but would engage and therefore enable it to focus on better communication. She focused on really working with become better at their work, focused on and rose from 106 at the same time that happened at the Patent and Trademark Office, indicator, and that is the number of patent applications log dramatically, and that is a critical indicator of PTO. So long one has to work an application to get reviewed, likely it is we can have innovation in the American economy. So at the same time that the PTO engagement, it also dramatically improved in a key performance indicator, and I know the commissioner, and I believe in large part it was due to her personal commitment to improving engagement. Here's how we did it at the University of Wisconsin. We directly and explicitly linked our employee engagement initiative to a strategic goal, which award merit. That drove our engagement initiative, created an environment of respect and inclusiveness. It drove what we were trying to create a 21st workforce, right talent, engaged, diverse, and adaptable. So position employee engagement as something off to the side. We position it as something directly linked. Indianapolis has a tagline, a city that works, defined it as a city government that runs well, and who reflect our community. So again, here very explicit about how important employee engagement is to effective city of Memphis. Human Resources Division, dedicating the whole organization. This is what we're about. Engagement is important. State of Michigan created an office, as you can see, works directly to engage employees. Michigan wants to be the nation's leader. And one of the few states, along with Tennessee, that has been focusing for several years now on improving employee engagement, because engagement drives superior. Of improving engagement is doing a good job of onboarding new employees. And much research has shown that organizations that do a good job of onboarding have higher level of engagement, better retention, and faster time to productivity. Here's a model that was at the partnership, has now been adopted by many organizations. Define onboarding as a period of the steps a job offer all the way to the end of that new employee's first year. And you see we've divided into 5 phases. You can divide it into 3 phases, 7 phases, but really being very explicit about putting together a comprehensive onboarding program to make sure that new employees have the knowledge, the resources they need to be successful to engagement. Also, performance management. Great piece of research done again in the federal government, trying to differentiate what the high engagement organizations do differently and better than low engagement agencies, and found that the single biggest differentiator between high engagement agencies and low engagement agencies was what you see here on the screen, the ability to manage performance effectively. The high engagement agency did these things more often and better than low engagement agencies. And I know those of us in HR, we can't force our supervisors to manage performance effectively, but we can create the structures and the training and the accountability to put our supervisors in the best possible position to manage effectively. So if you're looking for a one-size-fits-all solution, this is the closest areas about management and selection of supervisors who have supervisors and also can build high levels of engagement. There is one organization that I profile of the interview for managers gives the candidates a set of employee engagement survey data and asks the candidates right on the survey data and suggest what they might do to improve engagement if they were the leader of this organization. Developing competencies around engagement, holding supervisors accountable for engagement. I used to work until July at the university. I still refer to it as here. But we developed a set of competencies around engagement and inclusion because we wanted to make sure that our supervisors, our managers, our leaders understood what we meant when we said we want them to build high engagement organizations. So these are the competencies. Starts out at kind of a high level, a strong and effective leadership, high performing work unit, but then drills down to things like creating a positive climate, learning and development, creating inclusive work environment, and actively participating in the employee life cycle activities. So we developed these competencies, and our managers, you really want me to do to demonstrate these competencies. So we came up with a set of behavioral examples. I'm not going to read these, but they're around like communication, a couple of areas: communication, feedback, expectations, learning and development, etc. Did we develop competencies? But we said these are the things that you really need to focus on, and we developed a series of training programs around these competencies. So a few more ideas about what organization, making that connection, that line of sight between the work that I do and the mission responsibility for that employees see how they're the mission of the organization. Recognition. We can't always do that financially in government because we typically don't have the kinds of resources that the sector has. But sometimes you believe that they are doing a good job. The University of Wisconsin Hospital put together a toolkit for its employees to build engagement, its managers to build engagement, and part of the toolkit is a list of ways that their supervisors can recognize performance without spending a dime. Making sure that our employees feel like we are listening to them. There are some great ways to use crowdsourcing and social media approaches. There's one public sector agency that encourages its employees to submit suggestions to improve operations. It then asks the rest of the organization, the other employees, to vote on those suggestions. Any suggestion that gets 150 votes automatically goes to senior leadership for consideration to be implemented. Involve unions. I know many of you have organized labor in your jurisdictions, in your states, in your cities, in your counties. There are some great examples of public sector organizations that have involved unions early on, really made them allies and part of the solution and got the unions to be advocates for the process. There are also some terrible examples where public sector organizations have not done that. In one case, the union asked its employees to boycott the survey because it felt that the results would not be used in a positive way. So it's important to get unions involved in the process as early as possible. Work-life balance, workplace flexibility. Make sure that we are providing people with the opportunity to come to work and make a contribution, but then to go home and have a personal life. And this really gets into the whole area of employee wellness, and this is not a webinar about employee wellness, but to understand that there are different components to employee wellness, work-life balance being one of them, and we as leaders need to understand that and create opportunities for our employees to have work-life balance. And that doesn't only mean working at home or having remote opportunities to dial in. It means providing opportunities to do things like part-time work, job sharing, variable starting and ending times, really understand what our employees want and try to deliver that. And then communicate. Communicate not only about the engagement survey process, but about what's going on in the organization. People don't just want to know what the decisions are. They want to understand why those decisions have been made. With respect to the work-mission connection, there's a famous story from NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in which at NASA headquarters came across a custodian, and they asked this guy, and the custodian said, "I helped send the moon. Wouldn't it be great if all of our employees connection between the work they do and the mission of the organization?" So I'm going to finish up my section, talk a little bit about an engagement culture. What you see here is a definition that the Conference Board put together. Conference Board organized a consortium of public and private sector organizations interested and focused on employee engagement and conducted a research project around what an engagement culture is. And this is the definition that we came up with, that engagement is a cultural norm in our organization. It's part of our DNA. It's the way that we treat each other in the organization. And then we further defined what it means. Organizations that have achieved a culture of engagement have these characteristics. The business case, why it matters, is understood across the organization. Leaders and managers work together. We see the connection to mission. It's not just an HR program. We regularly measure and analyze it. We try to hire, advance, train, compensate people for their ability to contribute to an engagement culture, and we communicate very heavily around engagement. So, last thing I want to cover is the role of HR. I mentioned that I don't believe, and I think the research supports this, that successful engagement programs, strategies are not HR initiatives, but HR has an important role. We need to be able to champion engagement, explain what it is, what the business case is, explain it to senior leadership, mid-level managers, frontline employees. We need to be able to facilitate the process. Typically, organizations use a third party to conduct a survey, but HR is at the center of that process. You need to be able to look across the organization and figure out what's going to work to improve engagement for the entire organization. We need to be a role model. At the university, we surveyed our employees first as a pilot in order to work out the kinks, but also to demonstrate to the rest of the organization that we were willing to do this to ourselves before we did it to them. If we're encouraging them to be better at performance management, recruiting and hiring, training and development, we need to do that well ourselves. And we need to understand that in order to create a culture of engagement, we need to drive cultural change. It's not just about issuing a policy. It is really about communication and creating a new culture in our organization in which engagement is part of our DNA. And so some key takeaways. I'll let you see these. I won't talk about them because we have discussed them. But it's about performance and it's about a culture of engagement. And just very briefly, the organization that I'm the director of, Institute for Public Sector Employee Engagement, we have surveys that we have developed, specifically for the public sector. We also have benchmark data based on a national survey to develop a set of data on what the level of engagement is in the public sector, federal, state, and local, as well as the private sector. We also do action planning, implementation, and follow-through after the survey, after the reporting, to stay with the organization through the action planning and implementation process. So now, as promised, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Hunter. She's the Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of HR. Under her leadership, Tennessee really has become a national leader among states in focusing on employee engagement. Very impressive work that she's done, and she's going to tell you all about it.
Thank you so much, Bob. And before you go to the next slide, I would love to share with the participants just a little bit about the state of Tennessee and what our demographics, and also share that what's been exciting about this webinar is realizing that everything that Bob has been talking about for the last few minutes is a lot of what the state of Tennessee has actually been doing. So just to help you all kind of have a big picture, we have approximately 42,000 state employees. That does not include our higher ed. We have about 38,000 employees in the executive branch where we can actually impact them most effectively. There's 23 cabinet level agencies that report directly to the governor, and then there are about 20 boards and commissions that the board and legislature appoints their members. And so we have a pretty good population of people to work with, very diverse. And as Bob had shared in his slide, 28% of state employees are currently eligible to retire, and that's projected to increase by about 5% a year over the next 4 years, so that by 2020 we're going to be at about 50% employees eligible to retire, which really made us realize the things that we needed to focus on. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the state did do an extensive civil service reform bill back in 2012 that really positioned us to recruit, retain, and reward a talented workforce. So Bob, if you'll take us to that first slide. What I want to share with you all briefly is what the state has done from a retention perspective. And you see the very first bubble there is a dynamic employee development programs. And we have 3 statewide leadership programs that are open to all 3 branches of government. But over the last 6 years, we have created 17 separate leadership academies that are actually founded in partnership with our department and the agency. So 17 different agencies have leadership academies. And then we also have a 4-tier certificate program for supervisors that begins with fundamental management skills and takes them all the way to advanced leadership skills. And what we've been finding is because of the huge focus that we've placed on developing our employees, we're hearing anecdotally that engagement is really increasing across the state. And then we have, as Bob mentioned, how critical a robust onboarding program is. We have developed, we implemented a statewide task force to actually create that onboarding program. We have handbooks that are now available and templates for supervisors that walk them through the first 30, 60, 90 days that are the most critical, and even identified roles and responsibilities so that everyone who's a part of that onboarding process knows how they fit into it. And then a huge component for us was converting to a market and performance-based pay plan. And we've got, back in July of 2013, we implemented the results of probably the most comprehensive salary survey that had been done in the state, and did market adjustments for any employee who was not already at the midpoint of their range. And I'll share with you that 86% of our employees received a pretty good raise. The average increase was about 3.5% because the state had hiring freezes and had not been giving raises for the last couple of years before that. And then in January of 2016, we paid for performance for the first time, and just to put it in perspective, we really had to reset how we measure performance. When I first came to the state almost 6 years ago, 85% of our employees were rated 4s and 5s on a 5-tier scale, and so we knew we needed to change the culture around performance. And we still have a 5-tier system, but it's not numerical. And so, for instance, that middle tier that would have been a 3, we call it valued now. And if you get a valued rating, it's because you were doing the job you were hired to do. And we now see about 68% of our employees at that valued tier. And then advanced is that next level up. You're going above and beyond. And in order to receive a rating, an outstanding rating, which is the top tier, you have to have contributed in a measurable way to the goals of the organization. So launched Pay for Performance to great success. We had everyone who got a valued rating got a 2.5% increase. Those who got advanced got a 3.5% increase. And we would have liked for that top tier to be 4.5% that first year, but we gave 4%. And we are now positioned to do that again this coming January. What's exciting about our performance management system is Bob had mentioned in his comments that you need to have at least biannual conversations around an employee's performance, and we actually have 4. We have the initial conversation where the supervisor and employee sit down and talk about those expectations where they're actually set, and everyone comes to an agreement on what those work outcomes will be. And then there are 2 interim conversations, and then a final conversation around the rating. So we're excited about the fact that we're now generating about 114,000 conversations a year, which is so much better than 6 years ago when employees told me my supervisor won't talk to me. We also, what we've done to really distinguish between market and performance, because we don't do across-the-board raises anymore, is we do the market raises in July and the performance raises in January. And this past July, we gave anyone who made less than $50,000 a 4.25% raise, as long as it didn't take them above the maximum of their range, and got really, really great feedback about that. It was really to position us for the pending FLSA changes that are coming. So then you see the flexible work schedules and strategies, and we started off about 4 years ago with a telework policy, but have now really expanded that to what we call alternative workplace solutions, which is really trying to better utilize our workspace while increasing employee productivity. And it really allows employees to work how they work best for the job they're currently doing. And what's exciting about it is we have some people working from home. We have some people who free address where they can just log in and hotel depending on which part of the state they're in. And it's really helping us to meet the needs of the workforce that's coming in right now that says, do I really have to sit at a desk in order to get my work done? And we're having great success with that initiative. And then finally, the employee engagement strategy. And we, as I shared earlier, we realized that we're hearing anecdotally that engagement is up, but we weren't doing a really good job of measuring it. We had some agencies doing some things, and when you consider that there's 23 cabinet agencies plus all the boards and commissions, we really needed a statewide strategy to really begin to focus on employee engagement and truly measure it. So what's exciting about where we are, and you can take us to the next slide if you would please, Bob. What you see is our employee engagement strategy, and we're not, as you can see, we're not focusing just on an employee engagement survey. We consider exit interviews to be critical to that, also climate surveys and stay interviews. And you see we've got a pretty aggressive timetable here, but what I think is most critical to share with you is that this is a statewide strategy. This is our department's strategic goal. These timelines are in our strategic goal, and they're my personal SMART goals. When we totally revamped our performance management system, every single state employee in the executive branch has SMART goals, the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time sensitive. And these are my SMART goals that I have to report to the governor on a monthly basis to let him know how we're progressing and executing these goals. And what's exciting about it is for each of these, we're creating a statewide task force to really make sure that we can get buy-in and support across the enterprise, because each of those cabinet agencies I mentioned has their own HR director. We set statewide policy, we drive the compensation program, the learning and development, but it's all implemented in the agencies by individual HR directors. And so we will be partnering with those individual agencies to develop and execute action plans based on the survey results. So if you go to the next slide, this kind of shows you where we are. We started with the exit interviews because that seemed to be the most predominant tool that was out there, but it was just all over the place. And that's what's exciting about our approach is we're actually going to have a single statewide instrument that each agency can use, and then we'll be able to benchmark against each other and share bright spots where those exist, and let those that are struggling learn from others. So this kind of shows you where we are right now in the process. The agencies that we piloted it with were a part of the original task force and are really excited about it. And so that one's coming along really well. And you see on the next slide, you'll see a lot of what Bob talked about. This was just to share with you what we wanted to make sure when we pulled our task force together. What we found out was there was a lot of confusion around climate surveys and engagement surveys, and those questions were intermingled. And so we really knew we needed to distinguish between those two. We've also we're hiring a director of employee engagement. It's a statewide position that will actually focus on driving those action plans across the enterprise, and he'll be partnering with our Director of Organizational Performance and Data Management, who will actually be collecting that data, and the two of them sitting down together to come up with those action plans. For the engagement survey, we actually used IPMA's survey and overlaid that with Gallup's to make sure that we really had an extensive survey, and then we also make it optional for agencies if they feel the need, because we have such a diverse group of agencies, they can add some questions into it that will kind of customize it to their needs. And so then the next slide is the climate survey. And I think what's really, you heard Bob talk extensively about the engagement survey and how the focus of an engagement survey is how the employee aligns with the organization's mission and vision and goals. And you can kind of flip that for a climate survey. It's really how the organization aligns with and meets the needs of the employee. So you can see all the different components of a climate survey, and we'll be again utilizing the statewide task force to develop that one. I know Nevada has done some extensive work on climate surveys for those of you that are really anxious to get started on this. And then the final component is the next slide, and that is our stay interviews. And we introduced stay interviews through one of our statewide leadership development initiatives, our Lead Tennessee. And stay interviews, you really want to use those with that person that you think, oh my goodness, if I were to leave them, if I were to lose them, I don't know what I would do. So you really want to use the stay interviews for those high-performing, high-potential employees that you just would be somewhat devastated if they were to leave your organization. And this is just a sampling of some of the questions that you would ask. And so that's the last component of our engagement strategy, and we're excited about this because it's actually going to give us, again, that statewide look at engagement across the enterprise. And I'll I'll offer, before I wrap it up and close, that my entire career has been in public service, and what I love about public service is we share. So I extend the offer to anyone who's listening that any of the work that we're doing, we absolutely will share it with you. We know we all have limited resources, and if we can help each other through these tough jobs that we often have, I'm always happy to do that. So I want to thank you all so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Julie to facilitate your questions.
Thank you so much. So we do have some questions that have come in. The first one is, how would you address the laid-back culture in government and government workers? This is an obstacle to engaging staff.
I'll be happy to take that one.
Oh, go ahead. You can start.
Okay. For us, how we have addressed that is really by setting. It was the whole performance management piece, setting those expectations, telling people on the front end what you expect of them, because we all know that no one comes to work wanting to do poorly. I think every single person that we hire wants to succeed and wants to do a good job, but it's a matter of setting those expectations and then actually holding people accountable. And I think that's where a lot of supervisors struggle, because you have to be equipped to have those courageous conversations. So that's why we've put such a huge focus on the learning and development piece, equipping our supervisors to really be prepared to have those critical and courageous conversations that they need to have with employees to help them be accountable and deliver the results that you're looking for.
I think that's great, Rebecca, and I agree. I think people, particularly in the public sector, many of our folks, and CPS is a public agency as well, came to work because they wanted to make a contribution to the mission of the organization. And I think it's critically important to have those one-on-one conversations about what it would take, what does it take to get you engaged, to motivate you, and to really put you in a position to succeed. And it may be that we need to do something differently in your current position, or it may mean that we need to work together to put you in a better situation, a better position where you can make a contribution.
That's awesome. So here we have another question. How do you get around varying personalities, resistance, absenteeism, low morale, especially the job perception rather than career or culture?
Well, that's a mouthful. There are a lot of issues there. Again, I think it's really important to have those one-on-one conversations, as Rebecca identified them, characterized them. Sometimes they're difficult conversations, but and to hold people accountable, understand what expectations are. You know, most employee engagement surveys have a question about whether or not the employee understands what his or her expectations are. And if you ask most supervisors, do the people who report to you understand what your expectations are? They're going to say yes. But if you ask the individual employees, you get a different answer. So I think we as leaders sometimes assume that the folks who report to us understand what their roles and responsibilities are and what our expectations are, but we really haven't had that conversation with them. And then, as Rebecca said, hold them accountable for those expectations.
And Bob, I think that's a great point. I think what I have witnessed over my career is we have a tendency to take really great employees who are dependable, reliable, all enthusiastic and energetic, and we promote them to supervisor, but we haven't equipped them to be the supervisor, and then we wonder why they aren't doing as well. And I think that's one place we really need to place a focus is really equipping our supervisors to understand. There were several slides that Bob had in his presentation that said this isn't just HR's role. Supervisors have to understand that they're responsible for their for the engagement of their employees. And there's a difference between engagement and satisfaction too. So really engaging with your team and communicating with them and talking to them, because I know that's what we found in state government is, again, I shared with you all that I had employees that said my supervisor doesn't even talk to me. So you can imagine the engagement level. So I think doing everything we can to make sure we've equipped supervisors to really create that environment that helps the employee succeed.
And also to make it clear to them, to make them understand the business case, that this engagement stuff, it's not just another HR thing, it's not just some touchy-feely thing, it's not just something that we put at the end of a meeting agenda, and if we get to it, we get to it, and if we don't, we don't. It's really going to make their organizations perform better. And our supervisors ought to be focused on performance. This is a way, in an era of extremely short and low resources, that we can improve our performance. It's about performance. It's the right thing to do, sure, but it's really designed to improve individual and organizational performance.
Terrific. Okay, so our next question really seems to relate very closely to this. Our attendee asks, do you have any tips on how to get leadership on board when engagement surveys have shown that things like flex schedules, alternate work arrangements, and et cetera are desired?
Well, Rebecca, you've done this, so how did you do it?
Well, we started by doing it within our own agency, and I think that's really what you have to do. You've got to find, and I know I love when I hear Nevada's story because they kind of did the same thing. You've got to start with an agency where you know they're going to listen, where leadership can get excited about it, and then word spreads. So whether it's your own agency or an agency where you know that no matter what those results are, they're going to do something about them. And really do the follow through too. As Bob said earlier, you have, if you're going to survey, you've got to take action. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, we can do this. This is something this piece you all wanted, we can do. This other piece, we can do it, but it's going to take a while. Really communicating the results of those survey and just finding someone that will be a great pilot agency for you. That's where we've had our success is finding great partners to help us just really get it going, and then word of mouth spreads.
Yeah, we're actually talking with the state right now and having that very same conversation. This is a state that wants to pilot the survey process, and we're working with them to identify what you just said, Rebecca, agencies where there is commitment not only to collecting data and surveying, but also to following through. And another point I think it's important to make, it goes to this satisfaction versus engagement. Engagement isn't necessarily about just making employees happy. You know, sometimes supervisors feel like, well, you know, it's not my job to make my employees happy. It's not my job to allow them to have more workplace flexibility. It's my job to get them to perform. We really have to make the argument effectively that things like workplace flexibilities, it's not just about making employees happy. There is actual research that shows that organizations that create opportunities for flexibility within the constraints of getting the job done have higher level of engagement, better retention, and better performance. So there's really an empirical argument to make for these things.
Okay, we have a number of other questions. The next one is, how do you determine the cutoff between engaged and disengaged employees?
Well, you know, it really depends. There are quantitative ways to do that. If the survey, for example, is on a scale of 1 to 5, series of questions, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree, typically we will identify a score of 4 or greater to be an engaged employee. So that, you know, there are really different ways to do it. But if you survey your employees, then you really have the data. It's not just anecdotal. It's not just people feeling, yes, we have an engaged workforce, or no, we don't. We really have the data on which to make some decisions about what we're going to do, how we're going to sustain the positive things that our employees say they're feeling good about, and how are we going to improve the things that our employees are saying we need to improve. So it's really if we want to move the needle of employee engagement, we got to be able to measure it.
Okay, our next question asks if you have any tips on how to best roll out stay interviews for extremely large organizations. The example here is 27,000 employees.
I'll speak to that one, and I think kind of basically what we said before. Find an organization where you've got a leader that is well respected, and talk to them about helping you pilot it, because a leader who's well respected is going to understand the importance of the stay interviews. And that's always been everything we've done that's worked successfully. It's because we piloted it. We actually can start with our agency, and then we'll look for partners. We'll share our results and look for partners to do it. And I think that's really the best way to do it, because then that leader can become a champion for you, and through word of mouth help you launch it across the enterprise.
Terrific. Okay, so our next question is, what challenges, if any, have you encountered with your alternate work schedule solutions like telecommuting, and how have you addressed those challenges?
Go ahead.
There are. I will tell you that you're going to run into challenges of all types, and I would say one of our biggest challenges has been the supervisors who have said, if I can't see you working, you're not working. And so the first thing that we had to do was to make sure that we had objective performance measures in place to give those supervisors a comfort level, and to help them realize you don't have to physically see these people in order to know that they're doing their jobs. You can actually measure that they're doing their jobs. So that's another great example of looking for an organization or even a unit that has like a call center, somewhere in your organization where you can easily measure the work that's being done. And we've had to develop curriculum to help supervisors understand it is a culture change. But I will tell you that the workforce that's coming in nowadays, they really don't understand why they have to be chained to a desk to get the work done. And it really is. What we have found is each agency we go to, there are new opportunities because each culture is different, and I think that's the exciting part about it is addressing each of those challenges as we go along.
I think another challenge is you'll get supervisors who will say, well, if I do this for one employee, then I have to do it for everyone, and they're really unwilling or unable to make the kinds of decisions that need to be made. But we always like to say that treating people fairly does not mean treating them all the same. So if a person has a legitimate reason and can make a business case and can get their job done and still have some workplace flexibility, then supervisors should be willing and able to make the decision, yes or no.
Terrific. So we're actually running over a little bit right now, but we do still have a couple more questions. If you have time, we'll take just these last two.
Absolutely.
So the next thank you. The next question is, what outcomes can be measured and used to demonstrate the importance of engagement in the public sector?
Well, I talked a little bit about this. There are a lot of studies in the private sector that pretty clearly show that high engagement companies outperform low engagement companies on financial metrics. But there's also research in the public sector that shows that high engagement drives outcomes like achievement of strategic goals, retention, attendance, fewer on-the-job injuries, and better customer service. So there's a growing body of research in the public sector, not just in the private sector, that shows, and this is important because if we're making the argument to, for example, senior leadership, that we need to focus on this in our organization, that we can make the business case. Again, not just the right thing to do, not just about making our employees happy, but this is going to help us deliver a higher quality of service to the citizens that we are accountable to.
Terrific. Okay, last question. How can you re-engage employees who have been in the same position for years and aren't interested in self-development?
I'm sorry, would you read that one again?
Sure. It's how can you re-engage employees who have been in the same position for years and aren't interested in self-development?
In my experience, really pulling the group together as a team and talking about the goals and challenges that the department faces, and getting everyone to pitch in as a team, especially as you establish those goals, is really, really helpful. And oftentimes that works. Sometimes what you're going to find is that person cannot be held accountable, and as a result, you need to be, again, having those courageous conversations where you're saying to them, you know, these are the expectations, and if the expectations aren't met, then there are consequences. But a lot of times what I have found is I've stepped into situations where there really wasn't a team environment, and pulling them together as a team and trying to get them engaged and excited and working together in partnership can have a big difference.
And I really like that characterization of courageous conversations. I also think people want to feel important. So, and that goes to the link between the work that the person does and the mission of the organization. If that link can really be made explicit and clarified, that may be a way to move the disengaged into the engaged. But as Rebecca said, there are going to be situations where, as a result of these courageous conversations, there has to be an agreement that maybe this isn't the right place for the person, and we'll work with you to put you in a position where you can succeed. You know, we're probably never going to achieve 100% engagement. We want to move the needle as far in the right direction as possible, but there are going to be situations where, you know, we're going to have to take tough action and try to move people into situations where they can succeed, and it might not be in the situation that they're currently in.
Okay, that was great information. I want to thank you, Bob and Rebecca, for a great presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Again, we will send an email with a link to the recording of today's presentation. Thank you, and have a great day.